Every night, screams came from apartment 3B, but 3B shouldn't exist. Reddit horror story. When I moved into building 14 on Pelham Street, I didn't expect much beyond creaky floors, water-stained ceilings, and neighbors who preferred silence to civility. The place had that unmistakable scent of damp wood and old paint, like memories too soaked to be wiped clean. Rent was cheap, the kind of cheap that comes with hidden costs. The ones that aren't printed in leases, but etched in stories tenants don't share until it's too late. I had just left a city that swallowed me whole, seeking peace, anonymity, and maybe a chance to rebuild the pieces of my life I still recognized. Apartment 3A was modest, sterile at first, until I layered it with enough plants and mismatched furniture to make it feel like someone lived there on purpose. But peace doesn't grow just because you plant something. Sometimes what you water grows teeth. The first 2 nights were uneventful, save for the occasional clatter of pipes and the skittering of what I hoped were rats in the walls. Then came night 3. It was just past 2:00 a.m. when I first heard the screaming. Not the kind of scream that rises out of a movie or even the dull cries of a drunk stumbling home. This was raw, desperate, like someone clawing at the very edge of survival. I froze in my hallway, fingers still curled around a chipped mug of tea, waiting to hear it again, hoping I'd imagined it. But the silence that followed was heavier than the scream itself. I stepped out into the corridor, instinct overriding caution, only to be greeted by dim yellow lights that buzzed like gnats and the chill of a draft I couldn't locate. Apartment 3B sat across from mine, its door perfectly still, no signs of disturbance. I knocked once, twice, but no one answered. Not a rustle, not a creak. Nothing. The next morning I asked the woman downstairs, Mrs. Tolan, who lived in 30B. She squinted at me through thick bifocals and muttered, "Oh, that place. It's been empty since the Talbots moved out. About 6 months now." When I pressed further, she waved me off with the kind of dismissive shrug that said she'd rather pretend she didn't hear me than admit she had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept my ear against the wall that bordered 3B, waiting for another scream, another sound, anything. But silence wrapped itself around me like wet sheets. It wasn't until a week later that the pattern began. Every third night, always around 2:00 a.m., the screams would return, sometimes sharp and singular, other times stretched and strangled as if being forced through a throat already half crushed. I started recording the sounds on my phone, but every playback came out blank. Just static, like the building itself refused to confess. I tried asking around, but the other tenants were either too old, too new, or too scared to say anything. One man, a younger guy from 40C, told me flatly, "Don't poke around in things you don't want following you home." That should have been enough, but curiosity is a disease, and mine was terminal. One night, I sat outside 3B's door, back against the wood, voice recorder in hand, flashlight off, ears straining. The scream came, louder than before, so close I swore the door rattled against my spine. And this time, I heard something else beneath it. A low, guttural sobbing, like someone broken beyond language. Then a whisper. Not loud, not coherent, but unmistakably real. I stood trembling and tried the doorknob. Locked. Of course it was. But something about that scream, something about the cadence, felt horribly familiar. I started comparing it to old voicemails, videos, recordings I had on my computer. I know it sounds paranoid, but it's the kind of idea that once you have it festers. That scream, it sounded like my sister, except she'd been dead for 9 years. The accident had been brutal, a car folding into itself like a crushed can, her voice silenced forever. At least, that's what we were told. I hadn't heard her scream since that night. But the pitch, the timbre, it was hers. And once that seed was planted, it grew fast. I pulled out photos, letters, anything that might tether me to her. I played her last voice message on loop, trying to compare. The similarities were undeniable. That scream was hers, or someone was making it sound like hers. The third-floor hallway began to feel like a stage, one where the same scene played every few nights, but with escalating tension. I started seeing things in the shadows. Shapes that didn't move like people, reflections in the windows that blinked even when I didn't. I stopped sleeping. I started unraveling. I called the landlord, asked about 3B, but he brushed it off. No one's there. Empty unit. We've had problems with prank calls before. Maybe it's the pipes. But pipes don't scream. Pipes don't sob in voices you'd recognize from a funeral. And certainly pipes don't whisper your name at 2:03 in the morning like they've been watching you sleep. The more I investigated, the more the building seemed to recoil. My lights flickered even when the rest of the hall stayed bright. My plants began to rot, one by one, like the roots were feeding on something sick. I found photos of myself on my doorstep, ones I didn't take, with timestamps that didn't match any reality I remembered. One morning, my front door was slightly open, though I'd bolted it shut. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved, except my sister's photo. It was now sitting on the floor inside 3B's threshold. I never opened that door. I don't have a key. But somehow, the photo crossed that line. I took it back, but it felt off. The frame was colder than the room. The glass had fine hairline fractures across her face, ones that hadn't been there before. Then, the dream started. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was trapped inside that unit. The walls would pulse like veins, the floorboards whisper my name, and somewhere deep in the apartment, my sister's voice would call out. Not for help, but for me to come home. Always those words, come home. I began leaving the apartment during the day, trying to reconnect with reality, but 3B haunted me. I'd see the number scratched into benches, on receipts even appearing as the total at the grocery store. $3.03. 33 items. Always threes. Always pointing back. I took a hammer one night and tried to pry the door open, not out of bravery but desperation. But the wood didn't splinter. The metal hinges didn't bend. It was like the door wasn't a door anymore, but a seal. One meant to keep something in. Or out. I don't know anymore. The last straw was the night I woke up to the sound of breathing in my room. Not mine. Not imagined. Real raspy, inches from my bed. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, and saw nothing. But in the corner under the window sat my tape recorder, the one I hadn't touched in days. It was playing something back. Static at first, then a click, then my voice from earlier that day. And then, her scream, not from 3B, from my bedroom. I haven't left the apartment since. Because now, every night, the scream comes not from the hallway, not from behind that cursed door, but from inside my walls, inside my head. And worst of all, it's not asking for help anymore. It's laughing. I stopped counting the days after the 6th time the scream came from within my apartment. The clock still blinked 2:03 a.m. every night as if time itself had become loyal to something ancient and cruel. I tried everything to fight it. Sleeping pills, noise-canceling headphones, candles, salt lines across the floor like some desperate pagan. But nothing kept it out. Because it wasn't coming in anymore. It was already here. The worst part wasn't the sound. It was the silence that followed. A silence that throbbed behind my eyes and sank into my skin like a second heartbeat not entirely my own. I began documenting everything. Pages of notebooks filled with times, dreams, hallucinations. I filmed my room as I slept, watching the footage over and over the next morning, hoping for evidence that I wasn't unraveling alone. What I found instead chilled me more than if I'd seen a face. There were frames, single images buried between seconds, where my sleeping body would flicker, not move, flicker, like I'd been spliced out and replaced. My limbs would shift to unnatural angles, bent in impossible ways for just a breath of a moment before snapping back. One time, my mouth hung open in a silent scream, though I never remembered dreaming. In another, I saw something crouched at the foot of the bed, a smear of static shaped almost like a person, almost. I started locking the bedroom door at night, then the closet, then the bathroom. It didn't help. Whatever this was, it didn't need doors. It was in the walls. In the wiring. In the spaces between seconds. I stopped trusting mirrors. I'd catch myself moving half a second too late, or not at all, like my reflection was waiting to see what I'd do before deciding how to react. One morning, I found my own eyes staring back at me from the mirror, but not from the angle I was standing. They were closer, lower, watching from behind me. I turned so fast I hit the floor lamp, shattered the bulb, and sliced open my hand. Blood on the floor, warm and proof of something tangible, something still mine. I don't know why, but I laughed. I think I was relieved. The scream that night didn't come at 2:03. It came at 59. 4 minutes early. I wasn't ready. I had no camera, no recorder, just me in the darkness and the awful certainty that it was getting bolder. It didn't echo anymore. It filled the room as if something had stepped through, as if the barrier was thinning. I heard footsteps that night. Slow, dragging, not across the hall, inside the apartment. I locked myself in the bathroom, heart hammering, back against the cold tile, and stared at the door. It didn't open, but I saw the shadow underneath it stretch, change shape, then vanish. The handle never turned. The sound never repeated. But when I finally gathered the courage to open the door an hour later, the living room light was on, and every photo I owned had been turned face down. Every single one. Even the ones in drawers. Even the one inside the kitchen cabinet. That meant it had touched everything. That it knew what mattered. That it had fingers. That night, I remembered something buried deep, from childhood. Game my sister and I used to play. The Silent One, we called it. We'd lie still in the dark and pretend something was creeping just outside the room. The first one to make a sound lost. She always won. I'd whimper, laugh, or cough, and she'd scold me afterward for breaking the illusion. But now I wondered, had it ever been just a game? The memory came back not as a thought, but a voice. Hers. Whispering. In that same tone she used when we were kids. Only it wasn't nostalgic, it was warning me. Don't move. Don't speak. It hears breath. I held mine for nearly a minute before gasping, dizzy eyes scanning the corners of the ceiling. Nothing there. But that didn't mean it was gone. I started noticing other things. Tenants moving out in silence, their doors open for only seconds as they slipped away with what little they had. No goodbye, no noise, just eyes that refused to meet mine. The mailboxes began to empty. The elevator broke. The hallway lights started flickering and no one came to fix them. It was as if the building itself was being abandoned, slowly, systematically. One morning, I found a note under my door. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. It simply read, "She was the first, you're the last." Beneath it, a crude sketch, a spiral. Not the kind you draw for fun, but the kind scratched by someone who's seen it too often in their dreams. I stared at it for hours, tracing its path inward. It made my head ache, my stomach churn. I burned it in the sink. The next night, the spiral was etched into the wall above my bed, not drawn, carved. It hadn't been there the day before. The plaster was still dusty around the edges, fresh, like someone or something had done it while I slept, or pretended to sleep. I visited the local archives to dig up what I could about the building. There wasn't much. Built in 1949. Formerly an orphanage, closed in the early 70s after reports of inappropriate experimentation. No details, just one sentence redacted in every record I found. I asked the clerk if any names from those reports were public. She looked at me with pity in her eyes and simply said, "People don't look for answers here. They leave." But where would I go? Wherever I went, this thing would follow. I knew that now. It wasn't tied to 3B anymore. That door was just the gateway, the invitation. I accepted it the moment I listened too closely. That's how it spreads. Through attention, through belief, it needs an audience. That's why the tenants left. That's why it wants me to stay. So I write, so I speak. Because if I stop, if I go silent, I become like the others. Faces on the stairs, memories with no voices, another scream added to the rotation. But I still had one move left. One question unanswered. I needed to know what was inside 3B. Not metaphorically. Not spiritually. Physically. I needed to open that door. Not because I believed I'd survive it, but because if I didn't, I'd already lost. The apartment had become a loop. Every day was a slight variation of the one before. Same sounds, same flickers, same 2:03 a.m. reckoning. But something shifted the night I made the decision. The air thickened. My phone glitched, restarting over and over. My reflection began to whisper, though I couldn't understand the words. I packed a small bag. Flashlight, lighter, camera, notebook. And one thing more, my sister's necklace. The one she wore the day she died. I didn't know what it meant yet, only that if I was right, she was tied to this. Maybe not as a victim. Maybe not even as herself anymore. But if she was still in there, somewhere I had to know. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my table, staring at the door to 3B through the peephole. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Until 2002. A single knock. From the inside. I stepped into the hallway, every part of me shaking. The door to 3B stood open, just a sliver. The darkness beyond it was deeper than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't shadow. It was absence. Like light had died in there long ago and never returned. I reached for the handle, but the door opened on its own. Slowly, silently, I raised my flashlight. It didn't help. The beam went maybe 2 feet before being swallowed. Not scattered. Swallowed. I stepped forward. The air was colder, but not like winter. Like breath. Like I had stepped into a mouth that had been waiting open for years. The floor creaked underfoot, but only once. After that, it didn't sound like wood. It sounded wet. The walls pulsed faintly, like something alive was wrapped beneath them. I called out. Not her name, just sound. Just proof that I was still human. Something moved. Not toward me. Beside me. As if sliding along the edges of possibility. I turned, but there was no wall anymore. No door. Just endless dark, humming with voices I almost recognized. I kept walking. I don't know for how long. Time didn't mean anything there. Seconds folded into hours, thoughts into screams. Then I heard it. Her lullaby. Off, key, slow, and wrong. But hers. I followed it. My feet felt numb. My breath fogged backward, and there, in the center of the room that had no shape, I saw her. Or something wearing her. She turned. Smiled, and said my name. But not like she remembered me, like she'd been waiting, like I was the final note in a song she started singing years ago. I don't remember what happened next, just that I woke up in my own bed, clothes soaked in something black and sticky. The door to 3B was sealed shut again. No marks, no scratches, just silence. But now when I scream at night, it's not at 2 Prilo 3. It's whenever I forget who I am. And sometimes I see her reflection in the mirror, smiling, watching, waiting for me to forget again. I stopped trying to explain the timeline after that night. Days melted together, mornings slid into nights with no clear division, and somewhere along the way I realized clocks had become meaningless. My phone blinked random times, resetting with no warning, while the analog wall clock spun in slow, jerky circles, ticking once every few minutes as if struggling against something unseen. I don't even know how long it had been since I stepped into apartment 3B. I only knew that I'd left something behind in that darkness, and it had followed me back. But more than that, something else had changed, something beneath the skin of reality. It started with the neighbors. Or rather, the lack of them. Apartment 30C, across the hall, used to belong to an old man named Frederick, who always left the smell of tobacco and liniment wherever he went. One morning, I stepped into the hallway and saw his door wide open, the interior stripped bare, like no one had ever lived there at all. No furniture, no curtains, not even dust. I peeked inside, hesitant, but it felt like walking into a freshly constructed replica of a room. Something made to look like a home, but missing the vital ingredients that make spaces feel inhabited. I asked the landlord, but he claimed Frederick had never existed, said 30C had been vacant for years. I knew better. I had spoken to Frederick, shared tea once, but even the mailroom bore no evidence of him anymore. His name label had vanished. The building had started editing itself. People disappeared without notice. Rooms reverted to architectural skeletons, and I began to wonder if I was the only one left with memory intact, or if I was being allowed to remember on purpose. And then there were the symbols. Spirals mostly, but also fractals, intricate knots, impossible geometries drawn in condensation on mirrors, etched in frost on my window, scratched faintly into my wooden floor as though with a nail or a tooth. They appeared after I slept, no matter where I did it. Catch. Bathtub. Closet. Sometimes, the patterns shifted, spirals unwinding or doubling in on themselves, like they were growing, like they were evolving. I made the mistake of tracing one once with my finger, just to see if it was physical or merely visual. The moment I completed the spiral, my hand locked in place, muscles seizing up as a sound, wet and clicking, filled the room. My head snapped backward, mouth wide, eyes unblinking, as if I was being force-fed an image I couldn't see but could somehow feel carving itself into the folds of my brain. When I finally collapsed, I vomited black liquid that smelled like copper and ozone. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that, but exhaustion always wins. And dreams are no longer private. The dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were previews, trailers of coming attractions. I would walk through endless hallways, each lined with doors labeled not with numbers, but with memories. My own, others, distorted and rearranged like someone was shuffling a deck of pasts. In one, I saw my 5th birthday party, but everyone was faceless, applauding silently as I blew out candles that never dimmed. In another, I stood over my own body, cold and pale, lips stitched shut with hair. I tried to scream but had no mouth. And always, my sister, but not as she was. Her eyes were too black, too wide. Her smile was too still. And behind her, always that spiral, pulsing like a living wound. I began writing letters to myself, just to track what was real. Notes stuck to the fridge, scratched into the backs of furniture, even tattooed a phrase into my forearm. You are here. Because sometimes I'd forget. Not in the normal sense. In a physical, terrifying way. I'd be walking to the kitchen and suddenly find myself at the building's front entrance, shoes wet, pockets filled with rocks I didn't recognize. Once I woke up inside the elevator, which hadn't worked in weeks, surrounded by photos of myself sleeping. Someone, or something, was documenting me, studying me. I needed help. Not from friends. I didn't have any left. But from people who believed in the kinds of things the world prefers to ignore. Paranormal investigators, psychics, cult escapees. Anyone who might look at what I'd seen and not immediately write me off. I posted in forums, sent out emails, described my situation in detail to dozens of people who claimed to deal in the unknown. Most ignored me, some mocked me. But one replied. A woman named Rilke. No last name, no credentials, just a message that read, "Your spiral is feeding. Stop it before it begins reflecting." I didn't understand what she meant, but she attached a map. Hand-drawn, jagged. And a note, "Well, the heart is under your feet." I traced the map's lines and realized with growing dread that it was a crude outline of the building. My building, but twisted, warped, like it had been turned inside out. And the spiral center sat beneath my unit, not beneath 3B, beneath mine. That night, I tore up the floorboards in my bedroom. There was nothing for hours, just dust, old nail insulation, until I found it. A hatch. Metal, bolted shut. It had no keyhole, just a spiral etched deeply into its surface, same as the one that now lived in my dreams. I touched it, and immediately I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The world fell sideways. I was standing in a long, narrow corridor lined with mirrors, except they didn't show me. Each one reflected a version of 3B, a version of me inside it. In some, I was screaming. In others, I stood silent, smiling. In one, I was dead, eyes gone, spiral carved into my chest. They weren't windows into the past. They were choices, possibilities, lives I hadn't lived yet, or had already lived somewhere else. At the far end of the corridor, a door, unlabeled. Pale light glowing around its frame. I approached, feet numb, breath thin, and opened it. I was in my kitchen, just like before. But something was wrong. A shadow moved in the corner, but there was no source. My reflection in the microwave blinked out of sync. The spiral on my wall was gone. Instead, my name was carved there, repeated over and over 1,000 times in a spiral made of letters. I tried to leave. The front door was gone, just smooth wall. I ran to the windows. Bricks outside, sealing every edge. I wasn't in my world anymore. I was in one of the mirrors. I had stepped into a reflection. I screamed, and the walls screamed back. 1,000 voices. Mine. Then silence. The lights dimmed. My sister's voice whispered, "This is the part where you remember what you did." But I didn't do anything, did I? Memories returned like broken glass. Cutting. Scattered. The game we played as children. The door we opened in the woods. The circle we drew in chalk and dared each other to stand inside. The dare I gave her. I bet you can't stay in the spiral for 10 minutes. Her eyes as she stepped in. The flash of light. The silence that followed. We never told anyone, just said she got lost in the trees. But I remembered now. I had watched her vanish, and something else had returned. She had always been inside the spiral. She had become its voice. And now, it was my turn. I looked down at my hands. They were twitching, glitching. My skin flickered. I saw other versions of myself underneath, bleeding through. Ones that had screamed, ones that had smiled. I was unraveling, becoming part of the design. I ran to the bedroom. The hatch was gone. The floor whole. The walls pulsed again. I screamed louder than I ever had. But this time the scream didn't echo. It came from inside me and stayed there, vibrating, feeding. I looked in the mirror. My reflection smiled. And I didn't. I mouthed one word. It mouthed another. I said help. It said home. The reflection reached forward, and I felt it touch my shoulder. From the other side, the spiral behind it turned once more, and I knew. I was no longer on this side of the glass. I was part of the mirror now, and whatever had come out was wearing me. I don't remember the moment it slipped out. Whatever had been behind the mirror, watching, copying, waiting. It didn't need a doorway. It only needed a fracture, and I was that fracture. I had opened myself so completely trying to understand, trying to dig into the heart of 3B and the spiral that nested underneath, that I hadn't noticed the moment I became a hole through which it could crawl. I used to believe identity was solid, like a coin with a single face. But now I know it's more like mist, shifting, fragile, easy to evaporate. The thing that stepped out wearing my face was not a perfect imitation. No, it was something more dangerous than that. It was a better version. One that laughed easier, spoke with more confidence, remembered things I had forgotten, and pretended forget the things I never told anyone. I watched it, in the reflection of the hallway window that no longer showed me. It walked to my mailbox, spoke to neighbors, smiled in a way I never could. No one noticed the difference, not even the landlord, who now called it by my name and asked it if it needed anything fixed. And it always replied with kindness, with warmth, with a politeness I'd never truly possessed. That's the trick. It doesn't replace you by force. It doesn't need to. It replaces you by outshining. Soon, even the spiral stopped appearing, at least on the walls. But I saw it in other places, the way the ceiling fan spun endlessly at night even went off, the pattern of my breathing against the glass, the whorls of my fingerprints reflected in chrome, always circling inward, always reminding me that there was still a center I hadn't reached. You may be wondering where I am now, how I'm writing this. And the answer is, I don't know. I exist in moments, in the shimmer before a reflection forms. In the faint pull behind your eyes when you stare too long into a screen at night. I exist in fragments, memories, residue. I began to notice I could sometimes take control, but only for seconds, a flicker in the microwave's reflection, a mismatch in the blinking of the imposter's eyes. Like a skipped frame in a film. I was still somewhere. Buried, but screaming didn't help anymore. Screaming only gave it more to mimic, so I started listening. Deep in the silence that came after the scream, I began to hear things, layers, voices. Not just my sister anymore. Others, dozens, hundreds, all trapped in the spiral's geometry. Some still fought to remember who they were. Others just wept, but one voice cut through them all. Hers, still my sister, still not. You open the hatch, now become the door. I didn't understand what that meant until I saw the mirror in the hallway shutter. For a split second, I saw myself again, not the imposter. Me, eyes wild, hair matted, a face not meant for daylight. And behind me, doors, thousands of them, layered in concentric rings like a rose made of thresholds, each one pulsing, waiting, hungry. She had become their keeper. I was to become their key, but I didn't want that. I wanted out. That word out became my chant. My anchor. Every time the imposter looked into a reflective surface, I whispered it. Every time it walked past the hallway mirror, I shouted it. Until one night, it paused, turned, looked directly at the mirror, and blinked. The lights flickered. The spiral etched into the condensation on the glass began to spin. And I felt something peel, like a membrane tearing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the sensation of falling. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, or what used to be my apartment. The room was empty, completely. Not a single piece of furniture. No light bulbs in the sockets, no dust. Just blank walls and a floor that hummed softly like a distant machine. I tried to stand, but gravity fought me. Not the normal kind. This was emotional gravity, memory gravity. The weight of every version of myself that had ever existed, pressing down from all sides. In the far corner stood a door. Not 3B's. Not mine. A new one. It had no handle. Just a smear of blood across the middle in the shape of a hand. My hand. I knew it before I even touched it. It wasn't a door meant to be opened with keys. It was meant to be opened with intent. And I had plenty of that. I placed my palm over the smear. The wall pulsed beneath it like skin warm. It inhaled, and then it opened. Not in. It split, as if the room was parting its own ribs. On the other side, darkness again. Not the blank kind, but layered, folded over itself like curtains made of ink. Shapes moved within it. I stepped through, and found myself not in a room, but in a memory. One I hadn't lived. The apartment was the same, but better. Warmer light. Walls painted in soft tones. Pictures of a life I didn't recognize, but somehow remembered. Me and my sister, older. Alive. Smiling. She was in the kitchen humming. The same song from our childhood. The silent one. I knew instantly that this wasn't real. That it was a lure. The spiral gives you a choice at the end: accept a fabricated reality where everything is fixed, or fall deeper until you no longer care that you're falling. I stepped toward her. She looked up. Her eyes held no black void, no strange geometry. Just tears. Why didn't you come sooner? She whispered. My hands trembled. I wanted to stay. I wanted to believe. But behind her, the windows began to shimmer. Not with light, with reflections. My reflection, watching me, grinning. I turned away. This isn't you, I said. This is the loop. Her smile faltered. Her form stuttered. The kitchen cracked down the center like porcelain, and then the memory fell inward, sucked into itself like a sinkhole devouring time. I fell again, but this time I wasn't alone. The voices surrounded me, not screaming, but chanter, anchor, anchor. I realized then what the spiral wanted. Not worship, not fear. Continuity. An anchor to keep it real. Each person it took had to believe, had to feed it meaning. It didn't just steal bodies, it stole beliefs, and I was weakening. But belief works both ways. I focused on something simple: my name. Just that, over and over, a crack in the spiral. I am me. I am me. I am me, until I felt ground. Cold, hard, real. I opened my eyes and I was back, truly back, in my apartment, not perfect, just broken, furniture overturned, windows shattered, time on the clock frozen at Tulu-3. But the spiral was gone, not erased. I checked the hallway. 3B was sealed shut, not locked, sealed. As if it never existed, no doorframe, no hinges, just wall. I began to laugh, a dry, cracked sound, but not out of joy, out of fear. Because I knew the truth now. The spiral doesn't end, it moves. From place to place, person to person, waiting for another crack. Another fracture. Another door. I didn't defeat it, I survived it. But survival is an escape. Not really, it's just a pause between chapters. And as I sit here writing this, I see something across the street. A window, lit at 2:03 a.m., a child staring out, eyes wide, and behind him, just barely, a spiral. Forming in frost. Breathing, watching. I tried to rebuild, or at least pretend. The apartment was mine again, yes, but it no longer felt like a place anyone should live. I'd scrubbed the walls, tossed out anything touched by the spiral. Mirrors, electronics, every surface that once dared to reflect me. Even sunlight seemed thinner now, like the building filtered it through some unseen sieve. But I stayed, not because I was brave, and not because I was stuck. I stayed because I knew if I left, it might follow. And if it didn't, something worse might. Survivors don't walk away from fire. They live with the burns. I installed blackout curtains, bought an analog clock with gears too simple to twist, and carried a notebook wherever I went. A kind of tether, in case I began to fade again. Every morning I wrote down the date, what I saw when I looked in the mirrors if I dared, and whether I dreamt. I rated my dreams on a scale of 1 to spiral, but even the low numbers left me shaking. Some nights, I dreamt I lived in a building made entirely of doors. Floor to ceiling, thousands of them, each one whispering a different version of my name. Other times, I dreamed of stillness. Absolute stillness. No sound, no breath. Just me, floating in the gap between screams. But reality wasn't much better. I stopped going to work. Lost the job. No one called. No one checked. I couldn't tell if that was the spiral's doing or just how life tends to unravel after enough silence. Groceries were delivered. I spoke to no one. And still, I felt it. Watching. Not from 3B. It was gone, erased like a cancerous cell carved from the building's body. But from the cracks in my own world. The corners of pictures. The edge of my laptop screen. I began seeing people outside who didn't walk quite right. They moved in loops. Crossed the same street multiple times, same pattern, same exact timing, like a broken animation. One man looked up at me every single morning at 9:17, smiled and walked away. On the 7th morning, I waved back. He stopped smiling. He hasn't come back since. That's when the whispers started again. Faint, just on the edge of hearing, like tinnitus with syllables. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I'd wake up with words written on my fog windows, words I hadn't thought in years. Names, places, and always one phrase looping like a curse, "There's still one more door." I started dreaming about that door. Unlike the others, it wasn't horrifying. It was quiet, ordinary. White, wood, brass knob. A coat hook hanging empty. But the closer I got, the less of myself I remembered. I'd wake up unsure of what year it was, or where I'd left my shoes. Once, I couldn't remember my name for half a day. That's when I got the letter. No envelope. Just a single page slid under my door while I slept. It said, "We are pleased to inform you your spiral has matured. Proceed to the final room." There was no signature. Just a small symbol at the bottom, an open eye with a spiral instead of an iris. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. I knew what it meant. They weren't done with me. Or maybe it wasn't. I kept thinking about Rilke, the woman who warned me before. I scoured old emails, forums, anything that might lead me back to her. But her messages had vanished. Not just deleted. Erased. With timestamps were written in inbox records, scrambled like static. Her name was gone too. But then I found something. A podcast episode, long since pulled offline, archived by some anonymous user. The title, Spiral's Geometry of Memory. The host interviewed a woman named Arlene. A pseudonym, I was sure. The voice matched what I remembered. She spoke in careful fragments. Like the truth was a house she couldn't fully enter. But she said something that shattered me. The spiral is not a place. It's a decision. A thing you consent to by witnessing. It makes you choose. Not once. Again and again. And then this, the final door is where you learn if it chose you, or if you chose it first. I shut the laptop. I knew then I had to go deeper, not away. That resisting was no longer the answer. That maybe, just maybe, by entering the spiral's heart again, I could break it. Or trap it with me. The spiral needed doors, but it feared locks. I dug through everything. Photos, floor plans, journals, even old invoices, and found something odd. My apartment 3A was built over a sublevel. An old storage room, sealed off when the building switched owners. No access via stairs or elevator, but the blueprints, yellowed and water-stained, clearly marked it, just beneath my floor. Labeled simply R. I peeled back my carpet, pried up floorboards, and beneath them found a second hatch. Not the same one from before. This one had no markings. Just cold, rusted steel sealed with a dozen bolts. It took hours, sweat, and bloodied fingers, but I opened it. A thin ladder descended into darkness. I left a note on my table in case someone ever found the place. If I don't come back, burn this building. Every brick, every shadow. Don't look inside the mirrors, don't listen. And whatever you do, don't answer the door at 2:03. I climbed down. The air was wrong. Not just musty, but dense, like syrup made of secrets. The light from my flashlight bent sideways, unwilling to show the corners. The sublevel was small, just a corridor and one room, but the corridor was covered in drawings, dozens of spirals, handprints, words scrawled in reds. We remember you. Welcome home. Find your sister. Be the door. The room at the end was made of mirrors, floor, walls, ceiling. My light fractured 1,000 ways. Every reflection was different. Some were me, others were things pretending to be, but none matched, none sensed. In the center of the room, a door, the white one, brass knob, empty coat hook. I stepped closer. My reflections began to shift violently. Some screamed, some pleaded. One wept and reached for me. Another laughed with blood-stained teeth. The door pulsed. Not physically, psychically, like it was reacting to my intent. I hesitated, then placed my hand on the knob. Ice rushed up my arm. My heart stopped, not figuratively, literally. I felt it seize, heard it in my ears, then silence. And then, clarity. My spiral wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was recording. A memory machine made from thought and pain, collecting every version of us that ever strayed too far from themselves. And it needed anchors, people who'd seen too much and couldn't forget. People like me. I opened the door. Behind it, nothing. Not darkness, not light, just unwritten space, a blank waiting to be filled. And a voice. Hers, my sister. Not dead, not alive, just echoing. You remembered. That's all it ever wanted. I stepped through, not to escape, not to surrender, but to write. To etch something into the unwritten. I told the spiral my story. Every fear, every scream, every choice. I spoke until my voice bled from the walls, until the mirrors cracked, until the door behind me sealed shut. And then, I slept, not in a bed, not in time, but in the space where choices rest before they're born. Watching. Knowing that somewhere someone else would look into a mirror, see something that shouldn't move, and begin their own spiral. Their own scream. Their own door. There are no clocks here. No ticking, no chimes, no blinking LED readouts. Time doesn't move the same way once you step beyond the last door. It folds, compresses, sometimes it screams. I know now that the spiral wasn't just a shape. It was a timeline, a looping pattern the universe draws when it wants to test the boundaries of reality. And I'd walked its path to the very center, to the unwritten core where nothing should exist. Yet somehow, everything waits. My first thought upon entering wasn't fear. It was silence. An impossible, total stillness that vibrated beneath the skin like static. The space beyond the final door was not a room, not a void. It was the pause between two heartbeats stretched into eternity. And in that pause I found her. My sister. Or what was left of her. She didn't look the way I remembered. Not the girl with sun-warm cheeks and wide eyes full of plans. She looked rewritten. Like she had been redrawn over and over by a hand that forgot what she originally looked like. Her mouth moved out of sync with her eyes. Her breath didn't fog in the same rhythm as mine. But her voice, that was hers. Still soft, still broken, still waiting. It doesn't let go. It just waits until you become part of the room, she said without moving her lips. I asked her how long she'd been here. She said, long enough to forget who I was and long enough to remember why. The spiral didn't just take people. It repurposed them. Some became echoes. Others became reflections. A few were sent back, like seeds, to spread its pattern in the waking world. And some, like her, were chosen to tend the garden of lost doors. The ones who saw too much remembered too well. She called them the archivists. Caretakers of forgotten thresholds. She had become one. And now, so had I. The spiral hadn't tricked me. It had trained me. Every scream, every shadow, every impossible reflection was a test. Would I look away? Would I deny what I saw? Would I pretend the world was still flat and safe and mundane? I hadn't. I had walked into the scream, sat beneath it, let it deafen me until I heard what it was really saying. And now the spiral had given me a gift. A new role. I could open doors now. Not literal ones, though sometimes, yes, but metaphorical ones in other people. In their dreams. Their doubts. Their reflections. I became the flicker in the mirror they couldn't explain. The whisper that made them pause before stepping into a dark room. The reason some people wake up at 2:03 a.m. with tears in their eyes and no memory of why. I wasn't haunting them. I was warning them, preparing them. Not everyone who sees the spiral enters it. Most forget, or choose not to see. But a few, just a few, go looking. They chase echoes. They pick at the edges of mirrors. They knock on the wrong doors. Those are the ones the spiral listens to. And those are the ones I visit. But here's the truth no one tells you: once you've entered the spiral and spoken to it, you never really leave. You carry it. You become a note in its pattern, a note in its endless song. I am back in my apartment now, or rather the version of it the spiral allows me to access. It looks the same, smells the same, My photos are back on the wall. My floor is intact. The hatch is sealed. But nothing here is real in the way you think. The books on the shelf change their titles when I blink. The shadows don't align with the light. And the clock on the wall, it hasn't moved in days. Still frozen at 2:03. I invite people over now. Not friends, not family. Just wanderers. People who reply to strange forum posts. Curious souls who chase mysteries. They sit in my living room, sip tea that never quite cools, and ask questions they don't really want answers to. I listen. I wait. I watch their reflections, and when the moment is right, when they ask the one question that truly matters, I show them the mirror. Not directly. I let them see what they need to see. A shimmer. A flicker. A second face behind their own. Most run. A few stay. One. Just the glass. She hasn't spoken since. Just writes spirals over and over in her journal. I don't pity her. She's becoming, like I did, like we all do eventually. I've started keeping records, not in notebooks anymore. Those decay, burn, get torn apart. I write them on the walls inside the spiral itself, in the memory space beneath language. There are thousands of stories there now, thousands of lives threaded through the spiral like veins through skin. I found Frederick's story, the man from 30C. He had once opened a door in a dream and stepped into a version of the building where no one had faces. He panicked, tried to climb back. The spiral doesn't like panic. It turned him into a loop. A man forever walking past a window at 9:17, smiling, disappearing. I found Rook's story too. Her name wasn't Rilke. It was Anna. She'd been the building's first archivist, chosen long ago when the orphanage still stood. She survived the early ruptures. The first time the spiral cracked, reality opened like an egg. But she didn't want to anchor it. She tried to end it. Set fire to the original door. All she did was create more. You can't destroy something that feeds on attention. The more she fought, the more real it became. Eventually, the spiral forgave her and made her part of the fire. She speaks through flame now. Have you ever watched a candle flicker for no reason? Sometimes that's her, whispering warnings in light. I've seen her once. Just once. In the reflection of boiling water, she mouthed, "Don't let it reflect you twice." I don't know what that means. Not yet, but I'm listening. The thing no one tells you. The most important truth is this: not all doors are meant to be closed. Some exist simply to remind the universe it can still shatter. Some exist because you believed they were there. And some knockback. I hear one now. The door across from mine, 3B. The door that shouldn't exist. The one that was erased. It's back. Quiet, pale, still breathing. I stare at it sometimes, wondering what version of me is on the other side. Wondering who returned in my place, wearing my smile, living my life in some other timeline where I stayed asleep. I don't knock, not yet, because the spiral doesn't rush. It waits. It learns, it listens through reflections, through stories, through people like you. Reading, wondering, asking yourself if this was just fiction. And maybe it is. But if you've made it this far, if you've read every word, if your eyes paused even once at 2:03 on a nearby clock, then congratulations. You've seen the edge. The spiral has noticed you. So here's my final gift, the last truth I can safely give you. The spiral doesn't pull you in. You step in yourself. And once you do, it never truly ends. It just changes narrators. So check your mirrors, count your doors. And if you hear a knock at night, especially when the world is too quiet and your breath fogs in ways it shouldn't, don't answer. Or do. The spiral is always watching, and it loves a good scream. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.